What's up, everybody? Thanks for coming to hang out. Tell us about your D&D character. I'm sort of new to D&D. This is my second campaign that my brother-in-law actually got me into it. He lives like here in town. And before the pandemic, we started playing at my house actually on Sunday nights. And then after the pandemic started, we started playing like remotely on a Discord and Roll20. But we're doing the Tomb of Annihilation campaign. We're pretty close to the end, actually. All right, so I think I'll just go ahead and like start chatting a bit because I think it will save the video anyway, so I don't really have to wait for every single person to get in here. But just kind of wanted to go live and chat about some of the Jetstream stuff that's been talked about, passionately the past few days, and sort of like this is sort of an easier format for me to sort of address everything instead of making some big long post. And just to kind of get some things out in the open that I think are misunderstandings. And, I think the real driver behind like a lot of the uproar or, people's fear is that they feel like the Laravel UI package was kind of going away. And I mean, actually internally, like in the Laravel employee like company Slack, I had already discussed that we would just be maintaining that project indefinitely, basically because there's already so many projects using it. It's not really something that we can just delete or even like we have to keep it working with Laravel 8. We have to keep it working with Laravel 9, 10, whatever else, just because out of like service to the people that are already using it, which is like thousands of people. So that was sort of always the plan. But I guess the wording on the README where it says like it's not recommended to be used on new projects. I still feel like that's actually still my stance on Laravel UI, but it gave people the impression that it was going to be like, I don't know, it'd go away like sometime in the future, either not, not kept up to date with modern Laravel versions or whatever else. So we fixed that and just said that, it's sort of a basic scaffolding, but if you need something more robust, that you should use Jetstream, which I still feel like is the case because, there's been some criticism of Jetstream that Livewire and Inertia are sort of like young projects and aren't used enough by enough people. But the kind of irony in that is that the Laravel UI stack in the way that Vue is configured in Laravel UI, as I pointed out in a Reddit post, is already like a stack that no one uses, like in production. The way Vue is configured is not really like production ready in Laravel UI. Vue router is not set up. There's no really good story around data hydration for the Vue stuff in Laravel UI. So like, it's never something that I would use on my own projects if I was starting something new. Like I would never build like something like Laravel Vapor on the Laravel UI scaffolding. But I think that like people are working on different things, right? And some people, for some people, that simple Bootstrap scaffolding is really helpful. And I could actually sympathize with that because just a couple of years ago, like I could only do Bootstrap. Like I could never do Tailwind at all. So I actually do sympathize with that view. So anyway, we got that README updated to where it just says that, this is a simple scaffolding, but if you want something more robust, go use Jetstream. And then I think there was some other um, there was some other criticism that, you know, Taylor released Jetstream, and he's not listening to the community. But I think that there's, the crazy thing about that from my perspective is like the whole time leading up to Laravel 8, from my perspective, like I was listening to the community. And I think this is something that is actually a pretty big lesson learned, that Twitter is really hard to decipher, like what do people actually want? Like all the way leading up to Laravel 8, there was tons of people tweeting at me talking about, oh, we want Tailwind, we want like Tailwind scaffolding, we want tall stack, we really like inertia, blah, blah, blah. And like that was all I heard, like all the way up through the development cycle of Laravel 8. So like from my perspective, like I was on the right track in the sense that like nobody was saying like we love Bootstrap, we want more Bootstrap stuff like that. It was all about Tailwind, Alpine, inertia, Livewire, like that was sort of the hot stuff. So like, and I wasn't just building it because of that. Like I really like Livewire and inertia myself. I think they're really the most productive ways to do front end in Laravel at this point. And I say that having built Laravel Vapor as a Vue SPA, and just some of the stuff we had to do to make that nice, that me and Adam Wathen actually pair programmed on, is so much easier to do in something like inertia or Livewire, especially when paired with Laravel, as sort of like this mono repo where Laravel is your backend. If you're building like a separate API front end, or a separate SPA front end with like Vue CLI that calls a Laravel API, then of course you're going to do like a Vue SPA. But if you're building a mono repo with Laravel as your backend, then to me, inertia and Livewire are just the most productive ways to do that. And I think there's also a sort of confusion about what Livewire and inertia are. And I think this is an important part that people understand, is that Livewire and inertia are sort of different, or Livewire in particular doesn't turn your application into a Livewire application. Certain parts of your app can use Livewire, and the rest of it is just PHP and Blade views. So, like you can use Livewire on one form of the application or on a couple forms, and the rest of it could be vanilla Blade. So it doesn't like sprawl throughout your application and turn it into a Livewire app, if that makes sense, where it dominates every decision that you make in your app building process. And then on the inertia side, I think people also sort of make it bigger than it is. It's a pretty small library in terms of what it does. All it really does is replace the Vue router side of Vue so that you can use server side routing like Laravel's router. And then it replaces how you get data into your views. But that's really it, as far as what inertia is doing for you. The rest of it is just writing Vue and Vue components like you would in a typical Vue application. So when you're using it with a Laravel backend, it's actually really nice and efficient because you can get all of your data right there on the server side in one trip and hydrate it straight into the component, without, like Laravel Vapor does. Laravel Vapor loads the page and then makes all these XHR requests to the backend to get all the data it needs. If we could have built Vapor with inertia, it would have been much more efficient and actually more performant for us to do that. But I just wasn't super deep into inertia at the time. But again, like don't make inertia or Livewire bigger than they are. They're both, inertia is a pretty small library in the sense that what the scope of what it does, and Livewire does not spread tentacles throughout your app, turning it into this Livewire app. It's just a thing that you can sprinkle in where needed. And now the Jetstream Livewire stack uses it for some of the forms, like the two-factor stuff, updating your profile information. But that doesn't mean that you have to use it on every single form or that you have to use it throughout your application. We just used it in those spots because, especially things like the two-factor authentication panel, it just makes the UX a lot smoother if we can use something like Livewire, because it feels like, it feels like a JavaScript-driven app, really, when you're using it. All right, so yeah, that was kind of a long tangent on, for me, as I was building Jetstream, I was listening to the community from my perspective of that seemed to be what everyone wanted. So it felt like I was on the right track. And it's been a little frustrating to see, like on Reddit, people will say like, I have this echo chamber, these like group of yes men that like tell me, that like encourage me in my ideas, and really like nothing could be further from the truth, in the sense that like I didn't tell anyone about Jetstream, actually, not even Laravel's own employees, until it was actually like really far along in development. And James Brooks was kind of the first one to use a beta of it, and it was, I mean, very far along in its development cycle. Like he was able to use it to build something. So like there was never, wasn't like there was people like patting me on the back and saying, yes, this is a great idea the whole way through that. Like it was just my idea. And all of the open source stuff I built is just stuff that I want to build, like for my own personal fulfillment. And I was kind of frustrated because with Laravel UI, I didn't feel like I had something that I would use to build a new Laravel app as like a starting point. So Jetstream was sort of me building that for myself, and what would I use in 2020 to build a Laravel app productively, you know? And for me, I really enjoyed both Livewire and Inertia. I tried them both, and like I was so torn on which one I would actually choose if I was going to build a new app, that I decided to just include them both. And that felt pretty risky because, you know, I had to take on maintaining two sets of front ends basically. But I just felt like they were both great projects, and they were both made by Laravel community members that are doing a lot of cool stuff, that I would just include them both. Some of the people are chatting about how can you modify the authentication logic in Jetstream. Basically, if you go to the Jetstream docs, there is a section on features authentication, and there's actually a link at the top called customizing the authentication process, which says how you can customize the whole authentication process and even the authentication pipeline that everything pipes through. So that's pretty much where you would go to read about that. If you haven't looked at the Jetstream docs, that actually brings up a good point. If you haven't looked at them since like Jetstream launched, I would definitely go back out and look at them, because I spent several days like augmenting those docs quite a bit, adding new features, stuff like that. So that they've improved quite a bit since the launch, and just because like once I got a lot of feedback in the first launch week, it let me see what was missing or what people couldn't figure out. So a lot of stuff has been added since then. But yeah, as far as like, you know, this echo chamber, it's just like, it's almost humorous from my perspective because it's so far from the truth. It's really like the opposite. Um, you know, I built Jetstream basically for myself and by myself, and no one saw it until it was very far along. So like people, you know, even Laravel's employees didn't see Jetstream until it was basically done. Because I was just having fun and building it, and it seemed like people really into stuff like Tailwind and Livewire and Inertia, and this would be a cool way to go. And I thought it was very productive and better than my experience building a Vue SPA when I built Laravel Vapor. What else did I have notes on? Yeah. So another thing I'd kind of written down is, I think when people provide criticism, it's important to be really specific. And this is something that's also been a little frustrating, is some people will say they don't like Jetstream or they think it's hard, but they don't really give any specific thing or like any specific concept that is actually tripping them up, or like, you know, a specific thing that I can go into the code and actually improve right now. It's just very like, it's sort of generic. And you know, like for example, like a generic statement is Jetstream feels bloated. Well, like there's no real actionable takeaway from that. You know, like I can't go into the code and run some like debloater on PHP Storm or something. Like I need something more concrete that can actually be improved. And I actually got quite a lot of that in the first week of Jetstream's release. You know, which again was frustrating to see that people are saying that like Taylor doesn't listen to any feedback, because I remember like Andrew Butoff as an example, he tweeted that he really didn't like Jetstream. So I knew Andrew from years ago. So I just emailed him and say like, hey man, I saw that, you know, Jetstream wasn't really working out for you. What can you tell me like what problems you were having so that I can fix them this week? And he sent me back like a nice email with like a bullet pointed list of like 4 or 5 things that he did not like about Jetstream, and they were all like really valid points, and they were all things that I put into Jetstream in that first week after release. Steven, I think his last name's Bomber in the Laravel community, was another one that like he had some problems with Jetstream in that first week after release. And he made some posts about it or tweets about it. And so I DM'd him on Twitter and I was like, hey, Steven, I'm going to be working on Jetstream all week. Can you tell me exactly what you didn't like about it? And he actually made a GitHub issue that was really detailed and that we were able to actually improve a lot of stuff. Like that whole section on customizing authentication on the Laravel Jetstream docs is totally inspired by Steven's GitHub issue and his criticisms. So a lot of stuff has been added based on community feedback, but the feedback has to be specific, like it has to be actionable. Otherwise, it's just, it's just noise that no one can really act on. So if you have a problem with Jetstream, please share it like as specifically as possible in terms of like particular classes or files or things you're having trouble doing, or what a lot of people say, like, I can't customize it. Well, what can't you customize? Like, what are you trying to do? What is your end goal? What do you actually want your application to do with this customization? Like, that is the key information. Just sort of spraying out into the air, I can't customize something, like, I can't, I don't know what to do with that. So it has to be a lot more actionable than that. Anyway, so yeah, be super specific. If you have a problem with Jetstream, I would love to hear it, as long as it's something actionable that we can actually fix. I think yesterday I got really frustrated by it. There were so many comments about like, I can't figure out, or it's too hard, or I can't customize it, but there was just nothing concrete. I felt like I only got one or two things that were actually specific. Okay, what about the criticism on Reddit? What particular criticism? Like what I see in the chat. I'm just curious, like what specifically are you referring to? Any news on the Spark update? Yeah, we're working on the Spark thing. Spark, a lot of the features that were in Spark, we put into Jetstream and just made them free. We actually put everything in Spark, everything from Spark that wasn't subscription billing related, we put into Jetstream and just made it free. So Spark is going to be able to work, at least our goal is Spark is going to be able to work even on non-Jetstream Laravel applications, because Spark has really nothing to do with Jetstream at this point, and it's sort of its own thing that can be added to Jetstream or non-Jetstream applications. That's our goal with Spark. I think Spark will still be paid. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a little cheaper, because we've made some of the features free. But yeah, our plan for now is that it would stay a paid product. See if I see any other questions in the chat. I don't know how multi-authentication with Fortify. I'm guessing they mean like multiple guards. I'm not really sure on how to do that in Fortify. Jetstream has too much in it compared to Laravel UI. I may change what is enabled by default in Jetstream, because I sort of agree that like probably the profile photo stuff and the API stuff could be disabled out of the box, and you could just opt into those. And if those two things were disabled, it would feel pretty similar to like what Laravel UI's feature set is, except for having the update password stuff in the backend. But I really liked adding that in the backend because it shows or integrates with the authenticate session middleware in Laravel, which is a security feature where if someone changes their password, it logs out all other sessions for that user, which is a nice security feature. So I like having that in there. Yeah, I think there will be a Nova overhaul soon, because we just hired a full-time staff member to work on Nova. What specifically don't I like about the Laravel UI package? Well, like the one thing I mentioned earlier was, I think the view setup is not how I'd ever set up a production view app, right? It's not how I know anyone to set up a production view app, actually. The other thing is I find Bootstrap actually way harder to use than Tailwind at this point, or way harder to customize, especially. So like we just had this problem in Envoyer the other day where like doing something with Bootstrap and Envoyer was super painful, and made me actually want to just bring in Tailwind with the prefix feature. So again, like when I build open source stuff, um, I build stuff that I want to build. Like when I build commercial stuff, we build for our customers. When I build open source stuff, I build stuff that I'm passionate about. So like I'm not going to maintain Jetstream on Bootstrap because I don't even use Bootstrap, and I wouldn't even prefer to build an application on Bootstrap. So like I would never maintain something that I would never use. So Tailwind is less opinionated than Bootstrap. Like that's kind of another irony of the whole thing, is that people are saying that Jetstream is too opinionated, but Tailwind is much less opinionated than Bootstrap. So I don't know. That's been sort of a confusing thing. The presets thing is something that people are pretty confused about. With Laravel Jetstream, you don't need a preset system built into Jetstream. You would just build a Laravel package that depends on Laravel Jetstream and that ships its own install command that does whatever it wants. So like someone suggested a preset system in Laravel Jetstream, but it's not really necessary because you can just build your own package. You don't need Jetstream to have its own preset system, if that makes sense. Like you just build the package and depend on Jetstream, and then you basically have a preset. Fortify has its own documentation on GitHub, but I agree that like I don't love putting documentation in GitHub READMEs. So I sort of agree that that could probably be moved to the Laravel website. I wish that GitHub READMEs were like a little prettier and looked a little better. If I build Vapor, would I pick Jetstream? I would definitely pick Jetstream over ViewRouter. Yeah, and that's not really a knock on ViewRouter. If I was building an SPA, of course I would use ViewRouter. But like, if I was going to build Vapor, being the mono repo that it is, I would definitely pick Inertia or Livewire to build Vapor because a lot of the problems that we had would just been solved out of the box, and it would be much easier for us to build and more performant and more efficient. Swapping out Tailwind on Jetstream is like that's going to be hard. That's just sort of like one of the decisions that is in Jetstream because it's basically what I preferred. So like I said, you know, I can't build open source projects that I don't use. Like it doesn't make any sense for me to devote time to that. Of course, when you're talking about a commercial project like Forge and you have paying customers, then you build what your customers want. But when you have an open source project, you build what you want to build. I mean, that's, like to me, that feels sort of obvious. So I would always pick Tailwind over Bootstrap at this point. However, I do sympathize with people that like Bootstrap because, a few years ago, I would have definitely had to use Bootstrap because I didn't really understand Tailwind and didn't really, take any time to really dig into it. So I sympathize with that, but like, it's just, I would pick Tailwind. So that's what I'm going to build. If someone were to build their own Jetstream package variant, wouldn't they only need to use Fortify? Yes, that was always the goal. So like for me, Fortify is sort of the interface and Jetstream is the implementation. I think that's a really good concept for people to keep in mind. I knew that not everyone would want to use Jetstream. That's why they're two separate packages. That's why Fortify exists, is that it's a headless authentication backend that you can build any front end on top of. So like that was always the goal. Like if you want to build a React front end scaffolding for Laravel, you can use Laravel Fortify to power the back end of that. The Laravel UI authentication stuff is not as robust as Fortify. It doesn't have two-factor authentication. The configuration is done differently. So combining those two packages is not really possible. Yes, Fortify can be used to authenticate SPAs. That was always the goal, and that was tested during the development process. Maybe Jetstream should provide Blade only without Livewire. I'm really glad someone said this because I think this goes back to what I was saying earlier, is that Livewire is Blade. So you don't have to use Livewire on your whole app. Just you can only use Livewire on a little part of your app or on none of your app. So just if you're using Jetstream and you pick the Livewire stack, you shouldn't feel like you have to make every part of your app Livewire. Derek Pollard saying Livewire doesn't feel like Blade. Again, don't make your app. You don't make all of your app Livewire if you don't want to use Livewire for parts of your app. Think of the Livewire stack in Jetstream as a Blade stack with Livewire configured for you if you want to use it, but you don't have to use it. The login templates on Jetstream don't use Livewire because it's not necessary on those templates. Any plans to upgrade to Vue 3 and Jetstream inertia? Yeah, probably. The timing on Vue 3's release was a little inconvenient for our Jetstream release. They just were so close together. So that's a bit of a bummer that like Vue 3 came out so soon after Jetstream, but I'm sure we'll get it updated pretty soon. Someone I've seen THX 2007. I'm glad they mentioned this. It feels like Jetstream has a lot of files, like button, modal, secondary button, all of that. And part of that's driven by Tailwind because, when you're first coming to Tailwind and you see it, you think, oh, this button element has, 15 classes on it. I don't like that. And the solution to that is to componentize all of those things so that like you never have to repeat those classes. So that's why you have things like a button blade component or a danger button. I can't remember some of the others, form section and stuff like that, is because that way you don't ever have to repeat any of those Tailwind classes. They're all, it's sort of like the don't repeat yourself principle, right? Like if we have this common button pattern, we extract it into a blade component with all of those Tailwind classes. And now we don't have to, one, we don't have to repeat those classes. And two, we don't have to write custom CSS at all. So that's sort of like, that's really the recommended approach for using Tailwind and componentizing things is you're going to have, it pushes you to componentize a lot more than you would have with Bootstrap, because in Bootstrap, you would just do class button primary or whatever. So you don't feel like you're really, there's not much to really extract there or to dry up. But with Tailwind, it's really good to componentize things as much as possible. So that's why Jetstream has more files and components. That's sort of Tailwind best practices, really. Jetstream publishing Livewire component classes by default. Sort of the customization story on Jetstream, I tried to drive towards actions because Jetstream has two different front ends. And so one of the problems I had to try to solve was, how do I not duplicate the backend logic for both front ends? And that's why Jetstream has this action architecture that both front ends call into the same actions, so that I didn't have to sort of write two different backends as well. Because the backend logic is really the same for both, and the logic was extracted into action so that I could have one place to define it. I do agree that like if we could somehow export all of the Livewire components, all of the controllers, all of that into the app somehow, maybe that would be less confusing for people. I haven't looked into if that's really easy to do or feasible, but that may alleviate some confusion, possibly. Why X component and not L component? I think that's an L. The Blade component stuff is really inspired by the Spotsy package, and that's just the convention that they used. So we sort of continued with that. Jetstream does ask you to confirm your password when you enable two-factor authentication now. It didn't at launch, but it does now. See, any other questions before I head off here? Actions, are they a command bus pattern? Not like in the true command bus sense. It's more of just like I don't know. I don't know what the pattern is. It's kind of like a service class or whatever. To me, action classes are just named functions. Like that's just one method that does one particular granular thing. And I think they're a good pattern in certain situations where you want to really encapsulate like one little process and give it a name rather than just um, I don't know. It was a good pattern for Jetstream because it let me share the backend on both front ends. As far as I know, Fortify has full documentation. So, in the docs, I'm assuming they mean in the Laravel docs. Yeah, I agree. That could probably be moved to the Laravel docs. As far as people contributing to Laravel UI, adding a Tailwind preset, it already sort of has a preset system, and updating it to use Fortify is just gonna, to me, that's just gonna bring on the same complaints of I don't like how I have to customize it. I don't like blah blah blah. So to me, like I'm just gonna keep Laravel UI how it is. And of course, like I said, we'll always make sure it works on the latest Laravel, but I don't have any plans to convert it to Tailwind or to make it use Fortify or any of that stuff. Adding stuff to Jetstream to invite a non-existing user, it can be done. It would probably be a new larger release of Jetstream since it would be a little bit of a bigger change. Would you accept PRs to Laravel UI to modernize it? But that's really what Jetstream is. You know what I mean? Like that is modernized Laravel UI. So I'm not. Would I Laravel UI is going to stay how it is because that's sort of like that's what this whole thing is about. Is not changing Laravel UI. So I'm not sure what was really meant by modernizing it, but that's what I was trying to do with Laravel Jetstream, and that caused quite a bit of like certain segments of the community didn't really enjoy that really. So I don't. To me, I just would rather keep Laravel UI how it is, and I think this whole idea of you know, there's been a lot of talk about community this, community that, but everyone is sort of wanting to define their view as the community view. You know what I mean? And that's not accurate. Like if you love Laravel Jetstream, you want to define the community as, oh, the community is people who love Laravel Jetstream and everyone else is complaining. If you love Laravel UI, you view the community as Laravel UI is what the community actually wants. And Laravel people that like Laravel Jetstream are just Taylor's yes men or echo chamber or whatever. And both those views are really stupid, honestly. There is no homogenous Laravel community like that's used by hundreds of thousands of people. So like even if I got, for example, this whole Jetstream uproar, I mean, you're talking about maybe like what 100 people involved. So like that's 0.1% of Laravel's Twitter following. So like there is no homogenous Laravel community that we can say this is what the community wants or this is what the community needs. Like it's just impossible. So I just build what I think is best, and for open source, okay, like there's two things I work on. Like I'm an open source developer, and I also happen to own businesses that were inspired by open source products. When I work on commercial things, we do what customers want. When I work on open source things, I do what I think is best. So like it's important to keep that distinction in mind. If we did a survey of what people would want, it would be very divided. And like again, like why, like okay, but the whole premise is wrong. You know what I mean? Like the whole premise of doing a survey to determine what an open source person should work on in their free time is wrong. You know what I mean? Like I work on what I'm passionate about. Like I don't do a survey to determine what I spend my open source time on. Like that doesn't even, like to me that just doesn't make sense. Like I don't know. If again, like if this is a commercial product we're talking about, if we're talking about Laravel Forge, a survey of users of Laravel Forge to find out what we would build makes perfect sense. But like for example, like, you know, I'm sure Caleb, when he's working on Livewire, like, he mainly works on what he thinks Livewire needs, and it's mixed with feedback, of course. But like, he's not going to work on something that he doesn't even like or that he's not even going to use. Like, it doesn't make sense. So like, for me, working on Jetstream, it's because I love Tailwind, I love Livewire, I love inertia. Boom! I wanted to make a scaffolding for it that I would use to build an app. I don't use Bootstrap, so I'm not going to build a big Bootstrap scaffolding. A plain blade stack for Jetstream be pretty simple and make everyone happy? It's not really as simple like as you would think. Mainly because like some of those interactions are just really nice with Livewire. Like, again, I went back to the two-factor authentication thing where we need to enable it, confirm the password, regenerate recovery codes, all of that. And when you start turning that into just plain vanilla Blade and Bootstrap and doing full page reloads on all of those interactions, it feels really janky. Like, it doesn't feel like a smooth user experience. So it's not exactly as easy as you would think to do that. And I guess it depends. Like, if you're okay with like that sort of UI behavior, then sure, I guess it would be in theory easy to build. Like, it wouldn't be complicated because you could use Fortify to power the backend. But I just don't think the UI or like the UX would be very good. One person says they're pained that Taylor's bothered by the opinions of some people, and like, I'm not really bothered that people have an opinion, but I'm bothered by like misinformation, like that um, or like sort of vague criticism, and then also misinformation about how I work on things or why I work on things. Um, I don't work on things because I live in an echo chamber. I didn't even tell anyone I was working on it. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't. No one even saw it until it was almost done. So to me, that's just like false, and it kind of bothers me because it was something that I was passionate about working on, and then to sort of construe it into this malicious thing is annoying and just kind of dumb. The simple blade views approach to Jetstream might be a good compromise. I think you're right. It might be a good compromise, but like, why should I build it? You know what I mean? Like, I would never use it. I would. It's not how I would start a Laravel application. So of course, I'm not going to build it. And I think that's the beauty of it, is that you can build it with Laravel Fortify. Like, you can build it and release it. That is sort of open source. You know what I mean? So that's why Laravel Fortify exists, is because I knew going from the outset that not everyone was going to love Jetstream. That's why Fortify exists. It's headless. Headless means it doesn't come with any UI, and you can build it yourself. Someone says, would I merge that into Jetstream if someone built it? And no, because then I would have to maintain it. This is, again, like a big sort of misconception. Just because someone builds it for Jetstream doesn't mean that I'm necessarily going to merge it, because after I merge it, I'm now responsible for it. Like, it's now my maintenance burden. And it's something that I would never use. It's something that I'm not particularly interested in. So I'm not going to take on that maintenance thing. And we've had things in the past where like someone will build something like that and they'll contribute it to the framework and be like, I'll stick around and help maintain it, so that don't worry about it. But like, it's no knock on them, but like, after a couple of years, sometimes they're not even doing PHP at all anymore. They moved on to a different job. Now they write Python or Ruby or whatever else, and they're not around to maintain that. And now it's all on me. You know what I mean? So that's why I wouldn't take on that maintenance burden. I'm only going to maintain stuff that I'm interested in. Do I think the wording on the Laravel UI repo was a mistake? I mean, yeah, it seems like yes, in hindsight, obviously. I can't remember exactly what the wording was. I think it said it's not recommended to be used on new projects. I mean, in a sense, that is still true from my perspective. I actually don't. I don't personally recommend it. That doesn't mean it's bad. But I can see how the wording was bad in hindsight, like because I think people read into it that it's going to break sometime in the future, which I can sympathize with that fear, as like, um, that it might disappear or stop working. But that was never the intention. And that was actually the opposite of that was discussed in the internal Laravel Slack, that we would keep that updated because we had so many existing applications on it. Do I see Fortify having Passport or Sanctum support? Fortify and Sanctum are sort of, they're complementary. They're not. Fortify having Sanctum support doesn't really make sense. Like, it already works with Sanctum. So you could build an application authenticated by Fortify that also uses Sanctum. So they're not really mutually exclusive. The wording was, this project should no longer be used on Laravel projects. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's strong wording. In hindsight, I don't know. I personally wouldn't use it, but I can understand why people like it, I guess. If you just want plain Blade and Bootstrap. But I mean, the crazy thing about it is, like, it all goes back to from when I was building Jetstream. It seemed like everyone wanted Tailwind and Inertia and Livewire stuff. Like, no one was asking for more Bootstrap. You know what I mean? So, like, that was sort of like the surprising thing, and it's a lesson learned. That, like, what I read online is not ever an accurate representation of the Laravel community, because the Laravel community is not definable. It's not a homogenous community. It's too big. It's too varied in its opinions. So it's impossible to make statements like the community this, the community that. There's no definable community. You know what I mean? That's the echo chamber. But okay, when people say echo chamber, they mean it maliciously. They mean that I'm personally seeking out people that I think will confirm my pre-existing prejudices on what should be built. That is incorrect. Like, that doesn't exist. Like, me and Adam Wathan just play Rocket League. We don't talk about programming really. On Twitter, when I see people tweeting me about Tailwind and Livewire, that's just what people are tweeting me. That's not me going out and seeking, like, people that I think are going to confirm my ideas that I already have in my head. I didn't tell anyone that I was building Jetstream. That's the stupid thing about the echo chamber comment, which is so just dumb. Honestly, it's just so, like, far from the truth. My rank in Rocket League in 2v2 is Diamond 3, but the highest I've ever been is Champ 1. Well, the echo chamber being a bunch of guys on Twitter that agree with everything I say, like, of course, there's a lot of people that agree with things I say. Like, they really love Laravel and they love its whole philosophy. But to me, that's not what people mean when they say I have a group of yes men or an echo chamber. They mean that I have this elite group of people that always bow down to me and say, yes, Taylor, your idea is perfect. Like, that doesn't exist. My friends that I'm friends with in Laravel, we don't even really talk about Laravel at all. But, like, I'm just saying that the natural stuff that I was seeing on Twitter, like, unprovoked, like, people would just at me like, hey, it'd be cool if we had Tailwind scaffolding in Laravel. I was seeing a lot of that. And I still think Tailwind is better than Bootstrap. And I would always use Tailwind over Bootstrap because I think it's less opinionated. It's easier to build customized, bespoke websites on it, stuff like that. But that's just what I was seeing. I wasn't really seeking it out per se. If that's what people mean by echo chamber, sure, I guess. But when people say echo chamber and group of yes men, I don't think that's really what they mean. Anyone using Bootstrap should seriously question why in 2020. I think, like, Bootstrap is still valuable if I can see the use case for Bootstrap if you need to build an admin backend or something really quickly and you don't want to fool around with any custom design or anything. Like, Bootstrap is really nice for that, actually. And of course, someone could basically build a Bootstrap for Tailwind, and release it. So I don't really know much about ESLint, honestly. So integrating ESLint recommended rule set into Jetstream Inertia, I'm not really sure about. Probably be best just to PR it. Fortify without sessions, like Passport. If you need something like that, I would just use Sanctum or Passport. Taylor and I have the same size head. That's funny. Are you working on any new commercial apps in 2020 or 2021? That was not really the plan to work on any commercial apps in 2020. Like at the start of 2020, I think I said that I was going to spend all year working on open source. So no, we're not working on any new commercial apps. I'm really focusing on what we already have. And the Laravel team's been doing a really good job of adding just a ton of new features to Forge, and I'm finally getting to add some new features to Envoy. James has been doing some of that, and then Nuno and Mohammed have been working on Vapor. So we have a lot of stuff going on. We're trying to get Spark updated. Once we get Spark and Envoy updated, which those are kind of the two things that have been updated, that are the most in need of updates, then can think about new things. But I don't even really have any firm ideas for any new commercial projects. Nova overhaul. Yeah, we have a to-do list that David Hemphill has compiled over the past couple of years of things that we want to do in Nova that are sort of big things that would kind of be a new kind of major release, and that's why we brought on Muard full time to work on that stuff and to help us do that. So I don't really have that list in front of me right now, but we had a lot of big items on that. There was at least a dozen items on that list. How many hours a week do you dedicate to Laravel ecosystem? Basically 8 to 5, 40 hours a week. Can you use two-factor authentication to Fortify without Jetstream? Yes. It has API endpoints for that. I'm not totally sure if those are fully documented yet. I remember when I wrote the Fortify docs, I can't remember if I got to that part yet, but yes, you can use it without using Jetstream. Is Spark going to get an update to integrate with Jetstream? Again, we're trying to make Spark work with both the Jetstream and non-Jetstream apps. That was one of the downfalls of the first Spark from our perspective, is that it forced you to use the Spark UI. And so we're trying to get away from that. And the next version of Spark is more like kind of like the Stripe billing portal. It's its own separate page with its own separate front end that we can use whatever front end tech we want. And it's totally, as far as the front end stack is concerned, it's totally separate from your app. So that you can use it with Jetstream and non-Jetstream applications. Any chance for a Jetstream scaffolding with Vue and React without inertia? I really thought about that pretty hard when I was building Jetstream, and it's just like, it's just so many front ends to maintain. I was very close to just doing a Vue router instead of inertia, actually, but I just felt like inertia was so much better to work with in a monorepo Laravel app that I went that direction. But I did heavily consider it. I still think could be nice, but it's just kind of a lot of maintenance burden to maintain. Any chance of a Laracon live again? Yeah, possibly. Depending on how things shake out with the pandemic and stuff. Existing Spark users be able to migrate to new Spark. As far as the billing stuff, yeah. We haven't really got into looking at what any upgrade path would look like, but it's still you're just using Cashier, and it's going to support. Our plan is to support both Stripe and Paddle with the new Spark, so that's another big change. There's already packages out there that are plain Blade and Fortify. I've already seen like 2 or 3 that exist. So people have already built plain Blade and Bootstrap Fortify implementations already. I'm not sure the name of those off the top of my head, but I've seen at least 2. Please do not discontinue Laravel UI. That was never really the plan. The plan was to always keep it running on whatever the current version of Laravel is. What's wrong with the old auth routes controller-based scaffolding? I was never really a huge fan of customizing. Sorry, my dog. I was never really a huge fan of customizing authentication by overriding various protected methods. So in Fortify, I tried to move a lot of that to configuration values. Like, for example of that. Oh my gosh, my dog's going crazy. Example of that is where to redirect people to after they log in. That's now a configuration value. That used to be like a property. You would override a method or whatever, or on the controller. Same thing with customizing the auth logic. That's done in either using a closure or using some invocable class that you can write that you can link up to Fortify in the service provider. And in the docs, we use closures, but of course you can use invocable classes to move that out of to get all of that logic out of the service provider. You don't have to use a closure. So yeah, I was just never a big fan of like all those protected methods you had to override. I don't know. To me, that just didn't feel like as nice as moving stuff into configuration files or having your own, or even just using events. Like if you want to do something after a user is registered, just listen for the illuminate auth registered event. Like I wouldn't really override a protected method. There already are Tailwind presets for Laravel UI. I think Michael Dorinda made one. So those already exist and are maintained by the community. So Laravel UI had that preset system baked in. So there's already Tailwind presets for that. Jetstream, even Laravel UI, it never really needed a preset system baked in. Anyone can always just make a package. And for Jetstream, you can just make a package that depends on Laravel Jetstream and then write your own front end, have your own install command like Jetstream does, and then you basically have a preset. Anyways, I'll take a couple more questions and then I've got to run a couple errands. If I beat you in Rocket League, will you completely drop Jetstream? I love a good bet like that, but that's risky. Could be like Grand Champ or something. Any plans to beef up the team's functionality around Forge? Actually, yes, that's probably coming up in the next month or two. We've got a base camp to do item out there for that, and we've got some ideas around that. We're building an API for Envoyer right now. That's been long overdue. So once we get that out, we may come back to that Forge. It's not just beefing up teams, but it's also adding more granular team permissions and API permissions and stuff. Again, there already is a Tailwind preset for Laravel UI that I'm pretty sure was built by Michael Dorinda. So you can already use Tailwind with Laravel UI. Can we see a bundle of all Laravel products per site? I get asked that quite a bit. It's hard to do on our end. So like when I first built Forge, it felt very Laravel specific, even though you can run Symfony apps or whatever else on it. When I built Envoyer, I specifically made it not Laravel specific because I thought there might be a lot of people that want to do zero downtime PHP deployments that aren't using Laravel, and I didn't want any confusion at all about if you can use Envoyer with non-Laravel projects. So that's why those are very separate. The billing systems are all separate. It would be pretty hard for us on the back end to sort of merge that all together. Since I'm on the initial Forge $10 package, will ever be forced to upgrade to a new package? As long as your subscription is current, you're never forced to upgrade. A Christmas jumper. That'd be pretty funny merch idea. Again, like combining Forge and Envoy as a single service, like I said, like that was always my goal was the opposite. Some people want to use Envoyer that don't need Forge. Some people want to use Forge that don't use Envoyer. So like bundling them in is a little tricky. All right. Well, I guess I'll wrap it up for today. But if people like these little video things, I'll try to do them. I don't know. I'll try to do them more often. But thanks for hanging out with me. Thanks for chatting with me. And I'll see y'all soon. Bye.